And the dangerous thing is that when such a person with so much power, crashes against reality, he doesn't just acknowledge his mistake. This is the most fundamental problem of a dictatorship, is that when the dictator makes a mistake, he can't admit it. Russians and Ukrainians, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they are not enemies. Yes, they went their separate ways, but as part of a family in a way. He is turning them into enemies. This will be his legacy. He is planting seeds of hatred for generations. And this will be his legacy for the regional history. And if you look even broader at the whole world, then he's dragging the whole of humankind back to the jungle, back to an era of war that we thought we have already left behind us. Since 1945, it became unacceptable for one power to simply try to obliterate a weaker nation off the face of the earth, of the map. Yes, countries, they had civil wars of many kinds, you had all kinds of interventions. Some countries collapsed due to internal disagreements. But what was basic in history previously, that the big fish eat the little fish, that just because you're big and strong, you can invade your neighbor and just obliterate them, this became unacceptable. And I think part of what we are seeing with the amazing reaction of especially Europe, but also other parts of the world, is that people instinctively realize that if aggression is allowed to win in Ukraine, if a big country can again obliterate a weaker neighbor just because it wants to, everybody around the world will go back to the jungle. Not just because there are so many other conflicts, but think about it in terms of numbers. People sometimes say that the idea of the long peace that we've been living through has been a fantasy. It has been numbers in budgets. You look at the defense budgets of governments. In 2020, globally, the average defense budget of a country is about 6% of the budget. In Europe, it's about 3%. Historically, this is absolutely amazing. For most of history, emperors and kings and princes, they spend 40%, 50%, 70% on their military. Just 3% or 6%, this is the basis why we have a good healthcare system, education system. And now, the day after the invasion, Germany doubled its defense budget. And I completely agree, this is what they should do in this situation. But everybody understands, if we allow this to happen, if we allow aggression to win, then it will hurt every person on the planet, and not just the immediate people involved in Ukraine and Russia. The war is about the existence of the Ukrainian nation, and in this sense, Putin has already lost it, because even people who didn't know anything about Ukraine a week ago now know that this is a very real nation fighting for its survival, and it cannot be absorbed into Russia, no matter what are the fantasies of Putin. His problem is the most fundamental problem of every dictator, that people around him are so afraid to tell him the truth that eventually he becomes convinced, completely convinced of his own lies. He's said so many times that there is no Ukraine, and the people around him said, yes, 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 there is no Ukraine, the Ukrainians just want to join us, that he lost touch with reality. And the dangerous thing is that when such a person with so much power crashes against reality, he doesn't just acknowledge his mistake. This is the most fundamental problem of a dictatorship, is that when the dictator makes a mistake, he can't admit it. And there is nobody around, not any independent parties, not the citizens, not the media, that can tell him, you've made a mistake. And he just doubles down. And the biggest danger is, if we want to know what's coming next, we should just look at Syria. He's also the person behind what happened in Homs. He's the person behind what happened in Aleppo. And what keeps me up at night, literally, is that I fear that he will try to do that also in Kyiv, in Kharkiv, in these places. And my hope is that the Russian people would not be able to stomach that. You know, in Aleppo, in Homs, the Russians bombed from the air. But the slaughter on the ground, it was Syrians slaughtering Syrians. It's different when it's Russian soldiers fighting and some slaughtering Ukrainians. That it's Russian soldiers who are dying. And it's, you know, Russians and Ukrainians are family. It's literally. There are people that, they, you know, one brother is in Moscow, one sister is in Kyiv. So with Putin, I have no expectations. I think he has no limits, no boundaries. But I hope that the Russian people would not stomach that. Mm-hmm. And maybe I would like to add specifically about Germany, because as historians, we are constantly aware of the centrality of the past in shaping the present, in shaping the future. And you know, I would like to say to Germans, German politicians, and Germans in general, as a historian, as a Jew, as an Israeli, we know that you are not Nazis. You don't need to keep proving it again and again. You don't need to be afraid that if you pick up a gun or that if you raise your voice, we will think that you are Nazis. We know you are not. What we need from Germany is to stand tall and lead. This is it's now the leader of Europe. If you really want to make amends for the crimes of the Nazi era, it's not by being neutral, it's not by staying aside. You should be at the forefront of the fight for freedom, for democracy. This will be the best atonement for the crimes of the Nazi period. About Russia, not Ukraine, that, you know, for hundreds of years, they lived in an autocratic system, so they just can't have a democracy. And Ukraine shows us this is not true. They lived under the same Tsarist autocracy. They lived under the same Soviet autocracy. And they had even worse opening conditions than the Russian Federation because they didn't have the natural resources of Russia. So it's a much poorer country, actually. And they chose differently. They chose to have a liberal democracy and fought repeatedly to protect it. Which means that even if you come from hundreds of years of autocracy, you can still choose democracy. And this is, I think, one of the things that infuriates Putin about Ukraine. Because it's like a poster in the face of the Russians that, look, you can choose differently. Because, you know, if the only example they had, I don't know, was the Netherlands or Sweden, then it could easily be excused that, you know, Sweden had a completely different history than Russia. So it's inapplicable to us. But when people at Moscow look at Kyiv, they should ask themselves, hey, if they can do it, why can't we? And this is a very important, from a historical perspective, to understand that history is extremely important. It influences the present. It never determines the present and the future. You always have choice.